These drugs are very cheap and have a potential to have an enormous impact across the world. But obviously, that's not the goal of Big Pharma and the pharmaco-industrial complex.
How does this exploration of repurposed drugs connect with the thesis that cancer is a metabolic disease? Does that help us understand why some of these repurposed drugs have an efficacy based upon that alternative explanation of what causes cancer?
Exactly. So almost all of these drugs work on multiple metabolic pathways. So they act on metabolic and enzyme pathways within the cell. So I think it fits very well. And so what's unique about almost all of these drugs is, unlike cancer, traditional oncology drugs, which act, by one mechanism, almost all of these drugs, and you can look at ivermectin, acts by about 15 or 20 different pathways to interfere with metabolic pathways in the cell. And so that fits much better with the metabolic theory than with this chromosomal somatic theory. So almost all of these drugs act on a whole host of different metabolic pathways.
You've looked at over 250 of these drugs. So how did you then whittle that list down? What was your criteria to kind of bring it down to a concrete list of high potential repurposed
Yeah,
drugs?
so that's the difficult part, and it's a dynamic process that's changing all the time, and we keep on moving drugs up and down. But initially, we wanted to be sure that there was good clinical data, so that it's all very well that a drug works in a test tube or a petri dish or an animal model, but we wanted some data that it worked in humans. And obviously that was difficult because there are not going to be large studies that are funded to test these drugs, but we at least wanted some data in humans. At the beginning, I was a little bit stricter. Now, people talk about anecdotes. So, an anecdote is an anecdote, but once you hear an anecdote 100 times, then it becomes a much more powerful factor. So, I say that particularly because of the ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole combination, is that I can't tell you how many people we've heard from who've had outstanding results with that combination. Now, while there are a few published reports, it's not as extensive as we would have liked. But I think we have enough clinical data. The other thing is both drugs have a very good safety record. So they have been used for other indications. So we know that they're safe. And that's really important. Many of these drugs are used in the test tube with no human safety data. And obviously the first dictum in medicine is first do no harm. So we wanted to make sure that these drugs were safe. And we know without any question of doubt that, ivermectin, although it's been vilified and demonized, is a very safe drug. Because it's been used in millions of patients.
And is there any published research on ivermectin and cancer in humans, or is this
Yes, there is a little bit. There are about 4 or 5 case reports, unfortunately. So there's not a lot of there's quite a lot of in vitro data in test tubes and in animal models. In terms of patients, it's a handful of case reports, unfortunately. But we're hoping that will change. Obviously, it's the whole medical system is biased against repurposed drugs. The medical journals are controlled by Big Pharma. Medical schools are controlled by Big Pharma. So it's very difficult to get papers published that challenge the status quo. They just will not be accepted. But I think it will happen. We're currently doing a study looking at ivermectin in cancer. Hopefully we'll be able to get it published. And we're having encouraging results. So,
I mean, if we were living in it feels like we're living in a parallel universe, Dr. Marik, because it, if we lived in a sane world, we would look back at what happened during COVID and think, wow, we've got these repurposed drugs that have created enormous, they've saved lives, they've reduced symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. Why aren't we looking at why we should, how else we can apply these drugs to other contexts that offer similar application for what we understand about the different pathways and their interaction in the human body? Instead, we've got the absolute opposite. We've got this double down resistance against these things for the reasons you cited. And we will talk about, as we close later on, how we can tackle that, because frankly, that is a huge barrier. And that concerns me as a concerned citizen, knowing that if I ever come into a situation where I need to, or for myself or my family, my loved ones, seek out the greatest possible treatments for things like cancer, hopefully go through life avoiding that. But if I can't, then I will want to be able to try these things with whatever evidence is available. So how do we navigate around this? Because you preempted one of my questions. Why is there such a lack of large scale clinical trials for repurposed drugs? And is it simply conflicts of interest? Is that your view? Is that what you think is blocking?
It's because big pharma and the pharmaco-industrial complex do not want it to happen. Particularly oncology. Oncology is a $200 to $400 to $600 billion industry, and they will do whatever they can to protect their investment. So this has got nothing to do with the health and well-being of human beings, and it's an outright tragedy. And that's why, hopefully this new administration will be able to, the new administration in the US can change this somewhat because of these terrible conflicts of interest. There's no question big pharma are corrupt, they're immoral, they're illegal, they're not interested in health, they're interested in making money at the expense of people's health. And so this has to change. And I think us, the people, need to voice our objection. And hopefully we can see some change. See more use of repurposed drugs. Hopefully it can be more accepted. We can see more studies. And because if you think about it, cancer is a disease of the whole world. It's not like it's limited to first world countries. And these very expensive drugs just can't be afforded in, third world countries. Whereas, ivermectin, the WHO used to sell a 6 milligram tablet of ivermectin for 2 cents. That's how cheap it used to be. So these drugs are very cheap and have a potential to have an enormous impact across the world. But obviously, that's not the goal of big pharma and the pharmaco-industrial complex. And unfortunately, people have to wake up and realize how evil this system is, and that things must change. If we, interested in the betterment of humanity, we need to change the status quo.